Hello, New Zealand. Welcome to Political Playback. And on my left, always on the left, is Simon O'Connor. How are you, Simon?
I'm doing very well. I'm thinking we're going to have to change this round. We're going to have to change around the cameras.
I might see how technical I can be and do a little bit of changing over during the ad break, maybe, or something like that, and put you on the left or on the right or something like that. Look, before we go any further and get into our topics, I did just want to show this. That looks like you. Is it you?
Yeah, gosh, I think the second time that I've put a suit on since leaving Parliament. So gosh, look at me. Maybe I should be more professional, Bob, for this show.
Okay, well, that's okay. I don't want you to outdress me, but the fact of the matter is, you were on with Jack Tame on Q&A, and you were given, what was it, 11 minutes versus the 24 minutes on the other side of the debate. How did you think it went? You were talking about euthanasia and the potential expansion of the law.
Yeah, I thought it went well, actually. From my side, I was able to get out my points, which is that the current euthanasia law is not working as well as, well, some would like to suggest. And actually, I thought Jack Tame was pretty fair. Look, we'd always want more time, but look, we're used to Bob getting no time, actually. I mean, how many
Yeah.
articles
Mm,
have people picked up on euthanasia or abortion or any issue and find
mm.
no pro-life voices? So I'm actually quite grateful to Jack and the Q&A team to have given me the time I did.
Okay, and just for our viewers, what do you think were the key points that you were wanting to get across that you did get across, and hopefully persuaded the audience on?
I think really there are two broad ones. One is ultimately that so few people are getting any sort of psychological support or extra assessment. It's so low, Bob. It's only 1% of people seeking assisted suicide. It's beyond unbelievable when, all of us have probably experienced people who are very
Mm,
sick, ill, or dying, and you know that
mm,
they're stressed and depressed, anxious. The other is that the Ministry of Health that oversees euthanasia is already making mistakes in its numbers. And yes, they make excuses for why, but if they can't get the numbers straight, they can't fill the review panels, what else are they getting wrong?
mm,
Bearing in mind, we're
mm.
talking about the life and death of New Zealanders here.
Yeah. Now, one thing I did think was ironic was that when people went to Q&A to watch the replay of this, they came across this warning statement. The following content may contain suicide or self-harm. It was actually one of the statements that we made when we were submitting on this issue, is that how can we prevent suicide when we're assisting suicide? How can we argue against suicide or for suicide prevention when we're saying, well, actually helping someone commit suicide is okay in certain circumstances? So it's kind of ironic that they put that warning, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm pleased they do,
Mm,
because ultimately, we don't want anyone to take their life early or premature for any reason.
no.
But it does highlight the contradictions in play, doesn't it?
Mm, yeah.
That somehow it's okay in some circumstances, but not in others. And even though a lot of people think euthanasia is okay, they believe that they have to put these warnings up. And you go, well, what is
Mm,
it, guys?
mm,
Let's be consistent here.
yeah. Okay, look, before we get into our first topic, because it's not even on our list, but there was a missive that came out from the government just yesterday afternoon, and it was from Brooke Van Velden, who is the Minister of Internal Affairs, and it was basically saying that for birth certificates, we really aren't that focused on the mum and the dad. Look, if there's two mums, if there's two dads, look, I sort of wonder whether maybe there could be three, and maybe mum could pretend to be dad, or just not have mother or father, just be parent. I thought that when we changed the government, we were going to get rid of a whole lot of this social engineering. What's gone wrong here?
I think you're seeing the fruits, for want of a better word, sour fruits or misguided fruits of a coalition government. So something like the ACT Party in particular are filled with people who are libertarians, and so they are probably more woke in some ways than not, if you wanted to use those terms,
Mm,
Bob. And so they embrace all of this stuff, but it's not. It doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly with this coalition government that's talking about reducing bureaucracy, reducing costs, and making things simpler. Well, this decision
mm,
just makes it even more messy because they're going to have to still
yeah.
record the biological reality. They're not sure where they're doing that. But then you've got now birth certificates, which are really just fanciful creations for whatever you want to believe at the time. And as you and I talked off air, once you reduce birth certificates to just, well, I want these two people to be called my mothers or my fathers. Well, and let's hope not at one level, but when it does change, then we'll see people wanting to, have their birth certificates updated. Again, it's not based on any reality. And the other thing I'd really quickly point out, is this really the top priority in internal affairs? Is this really the top priority for this minister who's not progressing modern slavery legislation, which have far more impact and good for New Zealand?
Yeah.
So bad messaging coming out of the government.
Now, just in terms of coming out of the government, I mean, I put out an email release to all our supporters.
That was
today.
a pun. That was a really bad pun, by the
way. Basically saying that this is the government saying this, but how much of this is coming from Brooke Van Velden, who's the deputy leader of the ACT Party? I mean, how much would Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon be aware of this announcement going out on behalf of the government?
Yeah. So something like this is a regulatory change. So for viewers to understand, and by the way, if people have got questions, fire them through the Family First Facebook page if you've got questions around this or anything. But this is a regulatory change, so it's not a change of law, so it's not going to go to select committee. So in many ways, Bob, the power sits with the individual minister. But they would have put this into the cabinet papers. In other words, if the other ministers are reading their papers, they should have seen this. My suspicion is they decided not to pick a fight. They've gone, you know what, we probably don't like this. I mean, I don't know what's in their minds and hearts, but I think a lot of them would have gone, really? Is this the issue? But they've thought, it's just not worth burning political capital. And let's be completely cynical about this, Bob. Once civil servants float these ideas to ministers, if they don't get their way, they leak it to the media. And to be fair on this minister, the media would have come knocking at her door. Why did you turn this advice down? Why did you not do it? And before you know it, the government's got a whole brouhaha to sort out. So there's various dynamics in play.
I just thought it was interesting that it came out in the morning. We had been submitting on surrogacy and saying that children have a right to know who their mother and father are, and biological identity and whakapapa and genealogy are very important. And yet that afternoon, the government comes out and says exactly the opposite. Actually, we don't need fathers. You can just have two mothers on your birth certificate or vice versa. It seemed like a completely contradictory message. As I called our newsletter, it was a day of two halves, complete contrast.
Yeah, look, I think this is the problem with modern politics. This is the problem with progressivism, wokeism, whatever you want to call it. It holds feelings above reason, and therefore you have a lot of inconsistencies. And so it doesn't matter if it's this government or the previous, and I suspect if we keep on this current trajectory, Bob, you're going to see governments making hugely contradictory decisions, and this is just another example of it.
Yep. Okay, let's get into our topics. And the first one, well, we were just going to update it really, and that was about Darlene Tana and whether the Greens are going to go against all their principles and use the waka jumping law, which they hate and they want nothing to do with. They're going to use the waka jumping law to get rid of Darlene Tana. I mean, there's actually not an update to the story, is there? But the question is, when the Greens do vote on it, are they going to go with principle, or are they more interested in having their Green MP and getting rid of Darlene? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I lean more towards they will force her out. I think she's a thorn in their side. And they'll be prepared to swallow their inconsistencies, their hypocrisy, actually, to try and sort this problem out. Though there's a small part of me, maybe 10% of me goes, you know what, they're sort of used to her being there now. She doesn't get much airtime. They might, a small part of them might go, let's just leave her in the back bench and not worry about it. Yeah. But I think it was the High Court, Bob, has cleared the Green Party to push her out. So Ms. Tana was fighting them and said they were not allowed to invoke the law. High Court says that they can. But it's interesting, isn't it? The Green Party have had this decision for about a week now, and they haven't moved. They may be simply, actually, now that I say it out loud, Bob, they may be waiting for a recess week, make sure everyone's away from Parliament, and then they'll drop the hammer.
Okay, number 2 topic is, did Luxon lose it? Just before I show this clip, he was doing another stand-up media interview. They were talking about gangs. There was some question about they'd been culling the gang numbers because they were getting rid of the ones who didn't appear to be active and sort of identifying who were the worst gang members, who were the at-risk ones, causing problems. And I think the media were a bit suspicious about this and thought that they were culling in order to just get the numbers down, so it looked good. And Christopher Luxon reacted. Have a watch of this clip.
We have, absolutely. Just really quickly on Bennett's question around the national gang list. We recognise that it was actually, and the deputy commissioners just highlighted, they're going through and sanitising it because it was they sort of identified that it's quite hard to come off it, and so they want it to be reliable data. And that's why they're doing work around that.
Did you ask them to do that?
No.
This is kind of convenient for the government to have far fewer gangs.
No disrespect, but it's not about the frickin' targets. It's actually about the outcomes. And the outcomes here are actually reducing violent crime. Yeah. And so we want to make sure we've got the best, most accurate, sanitised, clean data we possibly can. So I appreciate the base may be moving and that'll be what it will be. But it's important we have good...
Okay. I mean, that word is kind of the one you'd say when you're trying to be polite and... don't want to say a naughty word. Did he lose it, you think?
I think you'd have to say he did a little bit. Looking at the body language before speaking, he was clearly frustrated, whether it was the line of questioning or, to be honest, quite possibly just tired and over it. I mean, I've been there myself, not talking about frickin' targets, but, life is pretty intense and busy in Parliament. So he looked to me like a man who just wanted to get out of there, was over the discussion. Unfortunately, he did, if you will, lose it. The shield came down very briefly. He's basically now created a lovely little meme clip for the Labour Party and others because, of course, National speaks a big game about targets. It's one of their big things. And so expect to see that being rolled out time and time again.
Yeah. Okay, let's just check some of the comments that are coming through. Tina sends a nice message, says hello, and she adds, I don't think Winston and Chris don't really care about that's about Brooke Van Velden's media release. I mean, I don't know. I think New Zealand First supporters might be a little bit upset, and I think even some National supporters are going to be a bit hoey about that particular statement coming out. Ben says choosing your own parentage isn't very informative. It's as woke as. Jez says, Bob, you and your team are doing such a great job with all the new media projects. Keep it up and hopefully your views and subs will swell over. Well, thank you, Jez. The best thing you can do, we'd really appreciate, is like us on our YouTube channel and also share. And so then the word gets around. It all comes down to you. All right, let's talk about another politician who's not having a good day, and that is Tory Whanau. Now, actually, she was on Q&A same day as you, Simon, and she obviously hadn't had the superb media training that I gave you. And she turned up and was asked about the fact that she said that she was struggling so much with the cost of living despite receiving a $190,000 pay packet as mayor, and the privilege that she sold her car, but apparently she didn't sell her car. So this is what she said to Jack Tame, and credit to Jack Tame, he pushed her on this issue.
Actually sell your car to pay the bills?
Oh, I think that whole thing has been well canvassed over the last few days. It is a distraction. We should be focusing on Wellington City.
Okay, I will, but just be totally clear with us, just so we understand it, and then I will move on, because a lot of people looked at that and were like, oh, Tory Whanau earns 190 grand. Does she really need to sell her car? I mean, did you need to actually sell the car to pay the bills?
No, I actually didn't, and it's a shame because it was taken out of context. It was an hour-long interview. You get a bit relaxed. I mean, the main reason actually was because it's a walkable city. I don't need a car living in the city centre, so,
Okay, so that's what she said. Just to see if it was taken out of context, this is actually how she said it.
Yes, things are tough, but we really have to work together and focus on solutions.
Do you feel, I mean, you get your salary and you get your car and you get all the perks. I mean, that's fine and that's great and you deserve it. I'm not trying to take anything away from that. But do you actually feel what we as Wellingtonians are feeling right now?
Yeah, look, I don't want to downplay the privilege that I have, right? So I am the mayor of the city. I have a house, and I'm very thankful for that. However, I've just sold my car recently to kind of help pay the bills, and I walk to work again.
Okay, so that's out of context apparently. It doesn't sound like it. I mean, an hour interview got a bit loose. I'm sure you've had a few interviews like that, Simon. You just can't afford to get loose with the media, can you?
No, you can't. And you know, one of the tricks about not playing fast and loose with the media is you tell the truth. They can't catch you out when you're telling the truth. And I remember when I was getting absolutely hammered by media around the abortion post of all things. I just spoke the truth of what I did and when I did it and why I did it. And I just remember sitting there, and eventually they just ran out of energy because it was going nowhere. Unfortunately, I think for Tory Whanau, she's making things up. She's giving them energy, and, you know, kudos. God, here's the Jack Tame Appreciation Club today, but, you know, good on him pushing her on that, because I think if you went back to the recordings after she said that she didn't need to sell her car on the first clip, you could hear about 4 spin doctors' heads explode. She also changed her story slightly further after the interview again. So, you know, look, not to overcook this, Bob, and I don't know her personally, but there's a part of me that's pastorally worried for her, because this is a person that's clearly not coping. This is not the first instance she said silly things. She also went on in that interview to insult other councillors. We've obviously had a few of the other, scandals. I don't think she's coping in the role, and it might be good for some of her friends and family to maybe encourage her to think about a better line of work.
Now, look, she did explain the real reason that she was under attack and having so much problems. And look, I want to play it for you, not to victimise her, but actually just to show you the kind of mentality that I believe comes out of the left, especially around critical theory and victimology. So this is on it was a podcast she did after the Jack Tame interview was pre-recorded, so she knew she had messed it up, but she still had the energy to go on this podcast. So the coverage is a little bit interesting, but just have a listen to what she says and the way she explains it away.
About me that a lot of my friends worked for Dame Jacinda Ardern, and they were in her office, chief of staff, chief press sec, all of them. And I'll just go, is this normal? Is this level of, negativity normal? And they're like, yeah, unfortunately. So when you're a progressive politician, especially a woman, especially in Māori, you just kind of have, unfortunately, get used to this level. If I let that affect me and if I fail, they win. Those who are pushing against progressive change. And when I see negativity against me and, the anti-cycle way stuff that you see, when I see rumours that are picked up by media about me that are meant to be dehumanising, all I see that is the privileged trying to stop progress. And so if that's part
I'm surprised she didn't say white privileged, but look, there's a whole lot of critical theory analysis just in that one interview, isn't there? And it's just a huge amount of victimhood, isn't it?
It's a woke word salad. Recall in the first interview you played, she described herself as privileged, and now in that last one, she's describing everyone else as privileged. Look, it's just excuses. It's the usual rubbish, to be honest, that we hear. Not always from progressive politicians. Any politician backed into the corner will always be trying to find reasons. But, the simple thing here, Bob, is she's not being challenged and critiqued because she's a woman or that she's Māori or she's a Green Party member or a progressive. It's because she's lied, basically, and she's been caught out. And you're right, it's just usual victimology. She's trying to now gaslight and blame everybody else when really Tory would be good to just go and look at the mirror for a few seconds and then point the finger.
Okay, Rebecca says, just referring to Luxon, that he must have been hangry. I think that's either hungry or angry. I'm not sure. Maybe both.
He needed
Because
a cheeseburger.
I get angry when I'm hungry as well. Uh, Ben says she lies privileged. That's interesting. Rosie says she keeps changing her story. Charmaine said her office eventually told Q&A that she did it to sell to defray costs on her mortgage. She needs to be more upfront and honest. I think that's a lesson, isn't it, Simon? That if you start telling porkies, it's very difficult to lie. It's much easier to tell the truth because your story doesn't have to keep changing. Rosie says maybe she's been taking lessons from Carmela. I think that is true. And yeah, well, Ed says does not say much for the people that voted her in. Well, they may be having regret. Some people had that from 2020 as well when they gave somebody a landslide. All right, what are we up to? This one will get you going. This is about the trust in the media. Stats NZ have come out with their survey and they have found that, oh, look at that. Trust in the media, that's out the far right. Let me just expand that actually. So trust in the media has continued to decline, and actually trust for Parliament isn't too good either. That's pretty low. You'll see out the left there, so you got police, trust in police is high, courts, education, health system has decreased, and I think probably there won't be much change in that. But the media has dropped from about 4.9 down to about, 4.3. So it just continues to drop down. No surprises from us, is there, Simon? That's why we're so busy.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the reasons, actually. You're seeing literally the thousands of people now who engage with Family First's, effectively television, if I could use it that way, or our various platforms that we're using, including this one tonight. It's why you're seeing the likes of Reality Check Radio, the platform, arise a lot of the blog sites, Substacks. I mean, you know yourself, Bob, with your writing in mind, lots and lots of people are engaging because they are turning away or have turned away from traditional or mainstream media. I would say politicians, they're always in the low trusted space. I mean, it's a worry it continues to go down, but you know what? We just talked about two politicians and their behaviours. We can add a few more into that. Across the House, I better add, I always keep reminding viewers, National went through a terrible patch of MPs doing bad things. You can begin to understand why trust is down. But for the media, they should be worried, but they're doing this to themselves. When they report in the way that they do, not all and every journalist by any means, but, overall, when they censor certain views, when they won't let you discuss, controversial issues. You've highlighted before, Bob, I think we might have last week, how the likes of the New Zealand Herald lambasts anyone who's commenting on their posts in a fairly derogatory, unprofessional way. No wonder people are switching off, let alone the way they treated us over the last few years. So I'm not surprised.
Okay, and there was an interesting article that you sent me through from Barry Soper, who I actually interviewed as my political correspondent when I was on New Zealand's Rima for 4 years, and this is back in the early 2000s, so that's how long he's been around. But he was saying that he...
I was going to say, you can't be that old.
He was saying, no comment, he was saying about how sort of that trust level, there was always combative between the media and politicians, but he thinks it's reached a new level, and he actually alluded to that little thing we put together about Jessica then Tova, about Jacinda Ardern during her, the pulpit when she was doing her pronouncements during COVID, constantly going to the same sort of matey reporters, and even the reporters were getting annoyed with that. But, for Barry Soper to actually start calling out his own profession suggests that, there are some issues going on there.
Oh, look, there definitely is. I think you end up in a sort of a vicious cycle in a way. I mean, politicians and media need each other, but there is a tension growing. I mean, the politicians just want their views out there in a way unquestioned. The media wants to give its views unquestioned. The days of sort of a give and take are breaking down. But I thought Barry's op-ed, it was in the Herald, wasn't it, was well worth reading, and it's actually not behind a paywall, which is nice. And he is calling out the lack of transparency in a lot of politicians. As he pointed out, Jacinda Ardern would take a question, but no follow-ups. But he also acknowledged, which I thought was really interesting, Bob, that media basically didn't do their jobs, particularly during the really rough COVID times. They didn't actually hold power to account. And I just thought that was fascinating for him to say it, although I suspect it's becoming a bit of the correction as people relook at their decisions and history. But it's well worth looking up to listeners and viewers.
Okay, now this one interested me, and that was that the UN General Assembly adopted a Palestinian-drafted, non-binding resolution demanding that Israel end its lawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory within 12 months. There were 124 votes in favour, 14 against, including Israel, and 43 abstentions, and New Zealand voted for it. And according to this missive that came out from Winston Peters, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister, he talks about a two-state resolution, and I did a word search on the word hostages but couldn't find it anywhere. So, I don't know. Is Winston Peters not reading the room on this issue?
Well, no, he's not reading the room. It was the wrong decision to vote for it in the same way New Zealand under Murray McCulley, a national government in 2016, voted for what's known as UN Resolution 2334. And I mention that because followers of foreign affairs will see that these two are linked. So to a degree, Winston was following on previous decisions. He'll be led by the policy advice out of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but they should have voted against it. The likes of America voted against it. Others like Australia, Canada, and the UK abstained. There was no need for us to support it. And put it really, really simply, Bob, we can all be aghast at what's happening in the Middle East. But you know what? It's all these people sitting around tables that talk about the two-state solution as if it's some amazing solution that will just be automatically adopted. And they seem to forget at least 2 points. One is the likes of Gaza and the West Bank have not been under any Israeli occupation since 2005. And millions of your taxpayer dollars and billions of those around the world have flowed into these areas that could have created a viable state. Instead, terrorist lunatics have used it to build tunnels and buy weapons. And the second is, because part of the resolution in the UN is that the Palestinian Authority should step in and create this state. Well, the last time that the Palestinian Authority appeared in the Gaza, they were butchered by other Palestinians known as Hamas, and they don't get on well together. So it's a fractured state from the start. So I just find this stuff quite infuriating. Not the concept. Let's be really clear about this. Not the concept. Something that may be in time, but actually at the moment, what an utter waste. And it's silly that New Zealand was part of it.
Okay, Gardener Gone Wild, interesting name, on YouTube says, media, not at all. RCR and Family First are my go-to for media. So there we are. Simon's got a show on RCR every Friday morning, 10 a.m. There's a bit of free advertising, right. Simon. I'll send you the invoice.
You're a regular guest on other shows. You're a regular contributor yourself, though.
I know, so it's nice having those alternative media, the platform as well. Kirstine says Tori is simply out of her depth. She needs to be honest, and then she will get some respect. Kevin says the media didn't do their job because they've been paid off. There's certainly that perception of a compromise because of taking funding from the government, which is why Family First never will, never have, never did, took money from the government. Matt says mainstream media, maybe one or two items, but most of this, not really. Leone says a two-state solution was offered previously and the Palestinians turned it down, which is true. They were offered some pretty good deals just recently, and they're just not playing ball, so it's pretty hard to negotiate with them. Ed thinks that Winston has fallen for a lie from the UN. Rosie says UN, more like disunited nations. And Nancy Margaret says, re-Israel, don't know who to vote for now. New Zealand First will have lost Christian votes over this, totally gutted with that decision. So I think there may be some concern around that. Right, let's move on. And next topic is 4-term governments. It's a no from me, Simon. But just before I find out what you think, this is what Christopher Luxon said when he was asked about it last week, which raised the whole spectre. I didn't realise it was in the coalition agreement, but there we are.
You've said you'd like to extend the parliamentary term to 4 years. Can we expect a referendum on that at the next election?
Yeah, well, all three parties actually in government are fans of the 4-year term, and actually I think the other opposition parties are as well. We haven't kicked off that piece of work yet because, as I said, we're very, very focused on these quarterly actions that we have each 3 months to get out the door. But that will come onto our radar, I imagine, fairly shortly. But again...
Okay, so he reckons we're going to have a referendum in 2026. Apparently it was part of the... when's the next election? Yeah, 2026. It was part of the coalition agreement, and he thinks that there's widespread political support for it. Was there when you were in Parliament?
Yeah, yes is the short answer. People will be saying, well, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and so in this case, politicians always want more time.
Yeah.
But actually, there's generally has been a consistent view that actually a bit more time is needed for a government. And you know what? I would probably lean more in that direction as well, having been there. It's just 3 years from a political side just moves very, very quickly. But there's actually a couple of really important caveats, which I still haven't fully processed in my own mind. One is that we don't have an upper house, and by the way, I don't want another one. And look, we just have a single solitary parliament that can pretty much do whatever it wants. There are checks and balances, but not as, let's say, robust as you might think in Australia or the United States. So, if a bad government's going bad, you don't want it for 4 years. And so that's a big issue. So a long way of saying, I'm sorry, it was a long way of saying it. 3 years does give us a lot of accountability. The other side is I'm not convinced on the referendum. And, a lot of your people now will find their heads exploding, but I think we'll end up with a repeat of what happened around MMP.
Yeah.
And how we got it. We got MMP in the 90s, not because people were particularly thinking about it. They decided to punish the parliamentarians. That's my perspective at the time. They went, well, the MPs want to keep first past the post. Stuff them, we'll vote for MMP. And I think you'll find if this government puts a referendum on the ballot about 4-year terms, the general public will give them a square up yours. So that'll be a waste of money, time, and effort. So that's just my quick perspectives live on Facebook.
Yeah, I noticed that, you get the UK where they have 5 years. I do find the US interesting because for some it's 4 years, but for others they have elections every 2 years. So it is all over the place. Look, I would never go for 4 years because I think 3 years is enough because when you think about it, not many political parties have gone just 3 years. Generally, they get 2 terms and possibly 3 terms anyway. It's fairly rare, isn't it, that we've had, just trying to think if there's been any recent examples of where we've had just a 3-year or 1-term government. But I would want some extra accountability, and that's why I'm a big supporter, as you know, of citizens-initiated referendums, because that gives binding, because that gives the chance for the people to stop dumb laws being passed that the politicians may think are a great idea. But it's going to be an interesting referendum because it's the politicians are going to be running the referendum, which is, I don't think it's a good scenario, is it?
I don't think it's a good scenario. As I say, I think conceptually I can see why they want to do it. Let's be fair, no government ever knows it's going to get 6 or 9 years. So you're right to say, well, how many have only had 3? But every government, it'll be like this coalition, particularly on its current polling. If in a year's time they're still in the same position, they won't be certain that they're carrying on. But the referendum side, my pick at this moment is that the public won't go for it, both conceptually because they don't agree, a bit like yourself, or they just don't want to give politicians what they want. Look at the trust levels of Parliament that you had at the start of the show. People will go, no, I'm not giving these politicians another year. I should add very, very quickly, if they do go ahead with this, they need to make sure that the change is 6, 9, maybe even 10 years out. There must be no perception, Bob, of any bias or attempt to give extra power to the existing government.
Yeah. Okay, we're doing fantastic. We're up to topic number 7, and I just want to cover this, and I'm being a little bit facetious here with the title.
I love these banners. People need to understand that you are the one who comes up with these amazing, and I don't even know what they are, so I think it's hilarious. This is great.
Oh, we always try to be a bit quirky about them. But look, the police commissioner, Andrew Costa, is stepping down. He has the nickname Cuddles Costa because he, tried to figure out was there unconscious bias in the police. That was after Black Lives Matter, and he got Kylie Quince from AUT to do the study, which was like putting petrol on a fire. When Labour was in power, apparently Simon Bridges, who was leader of the National Party at the time, said Costa was a wokester. Mark Mitchell, who's now the Minister of Police, said that Costa liked having cups of tea with gang members. And one thing that I thought was really bad, just before I come to you for what your thoughts on him, was ACT leader David Seymour said Costa Commissioner Gaslight, he called him, because of his response to concerns from East Coast communities about crime levels following Cyclone Gabrielle. But one thing Costa said, he said his proudest day as police commissioner with the police was the operation to end the Parliament protests. I really struggled with that because I thought there were no winners on that day. And I just thought it was a little tone deaf in what he said. Sure, police operationally, they achieved what they wanted to, but what was the cost of that whole process? But anyway, you've been in Parliament when Costa has been Commissioner of Police. What's your thoughts on him? Does he leave a good legacy or a bad legacy?
Unfortunately for him, he leaves a bad legacy. I mean, he's actually a very talented man and a good heart, but he wasn't a good police commissioner. And actually, you've summed up, I mean, and I wasn't aware of this, if he says the parliamentary protests was his finest moment, I mean, that's actually bordering on disgraceful, both of how it happened, why it happened. But if you talk to the police on the day, from their side alone, he sent police in to a very volatile and eventually violent situation without the right equipment. You had police officers defending themselves against bricks being thrown at them without the right equipment, and then at times too, police that probably weren't with the right equipment or adequately trained, who would then in effect attacking. So I mean, it was a bad situation, and he's the commissioner, so that's pretty shocking. Look, this is an elegant solution for the government to move him out of the way. You mentioned, Mark Mitchell's comments about him. That won't have changed. So moving him into a new government ministry is an elegant solution, but I don't think you'll be missed, including by the front line. But I do just want to underscore, I don't doubt the man's intention. I didn't mind some of my interactions with him in Parliament, but his view of policing in the world is not where most New Zealanders are at. And again, you've summed it up with his views on gangs, bringing in the likes of Kylie Quince, talking about racism in police and all of this stuff. So I suspect the police will be pleased he's moving on.
Okay, 2 more quick topics. We're going at speed tonight. The public service merry-go-round, this was just a point that you made, was that Costa is moving on from one government position to another, and your experience of Wellington is what? There's a bit of a merry-go-round of the public service?
Yeah, unfortunately so. Look, there's some really great senior civil servants there, and rightly they move across different departments up and through. One that jumps to mind is Rebecca Kitteridge. She used to head up the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and then she headed up, she used to actually look after the Governor-General, and then she looked after the SIS. So, there's skill and competency. But as I say, while it's elegant to have moved Costa from police, and now he's with the Social Investment Ministry, or whatever they want to call it, social impact, it is just sort of moving the chairs, and I think the former somewhat disgraced head of Oranga Tamariki has now remarkably found herself in the role of the chief executive of the Ministry of Regulation. And you go, what?
Ah.
How does that happen? They just seem to recycle a lot of the same people.
So I don't know did you read the run sheet that I sent you? Because I actually put a line in there which I don't think you reacted to, and I just put, is Simon O'Connor shuffling off to Family First an example of the merry-go-round?
Yeah. Well, if my wife were here, she would tell you need to put at the start of any email or note, Simon, read that paragraph, because I skim things at such speed. Yeah, that's right. Read the whole thing. Get the milk. Okay. It's in paragraph 4.
Okay, so Andrew Costa has gone off to the social impact. What's it called? The social something?
Well, it's whatever the ministry is that looks after the social investment ideas. That's Bill English's concept introduced years ago in the previous national government, that we should look at the data about where money is spent and what the outcomes are.
Okay, well, just to let you know that I do not have a lot of faith in it. I've got a lot of faith in Bill English and his concept, but not in what it's become. And the reason is because I went and had a look at the website, and I immediately found that they are woke as. They have got the rainbow tick, and they're going to do everything they can to keep it. And then if you go to their diversity, equity and inclusion plan, and you'll see here, look at this. They want to lift the number of rainbow people in the public service. So I think, I don't know, but just a suspicion, Simon, I think that this particular group may have been taken over by the wokesters, and it's all going to be downhill.
I think you'll find, I haven't done my research, but I'd back my view here that you'll find pretty much every government department drunk the Kool-Aid on all this stuff. And, the government's talked a big game about cutting costs. One of the best things they could do is actually get rid of all this DEI nonsense. How many people across how many government ministries are employed to write these reports and focus on these arbitrary targets rather than what New Zealanders want. I mean, if you're following the news at the moment, the healthcare system's falling apart. I wouldn't mind a few more nurses and doctors, thanks very much.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Gosh, we've done fantastic. We're up to the final topic. What is the final topic? The final topic is, oh yes, interesting one, modern slavery legislation. Now, do you want to just give us some background on this? Because it sort of just whisked across the news and I sort of wasn't focused on it, but you've been monitoring it.
Yeah, this is one of my big issues, actually. I had a bill in the ballot in Parliament around this very issue. Long and short, it's about forced labour and child labour, particularly overseas, which is used to make the products that we enjoy. And so the simplest example is the Uyghur people, 1 million plus of them in concentration camps in China, in a cotton producing area. And so a lot of the cotton products that come into the international market, not all of them, Bob, but a lot of them are basically processed by modern slaves, imprisoned forced labour, a lot of other areas, India, Bangladesh and so forth, child labour, certainly in Africa, is used. And so modern slavery legislation in the likes of America and Canada and Australia forces companies to audit and ensure that, their products are not being made by forced labour, by child labour, by slaves. And there's major consequences if they do, both by financial imposition, but also by moral shame. But to New Zealand's shame, we're not progressing it. And to be really blunt, I think it's an absolute disgrace. The Prime Minister said this was the issue he would march in the street about, and yet leading this government, the minister's more interested, because she's the one doing the birth certificates, doing that, than modern slavery. It really is a disgrace, and it actually upsets me.
So putting two mothers on your birth certificate is more important than modern slavery legislation. How ironic.
Oh, it really is terrible. And look, the counter argument will be that governments are busy. Well, yes, they are. But, we make a big song and dance in this country that we're all about human rights and so forth. And yet we are laggards when it comes to the likes of modern slavery legislation, Magnitsky legislation, which holds human rights abuses to account. New Zealand does not have these laws. And our, allies overseas just think it's ridiculous. So it's very sad that this has not been progressed.
Okay, I've got one more question for you. Just before I do that, though, I want to play this clip. This is Christopher Luxon back in 2022, 2 years ago.
What would you march in the street for?
There's something I feel very passionate about is modern slavery, for example. It's something that I've been really passionate about for a long time. That's something that I think we could do a better job of and have modern slavery legislation and make sure that we're holding up to ourselves to a standard. There's those things I feel passionate about.
I've heard you say that a couple of times. Where does that come from?
Well, it sort of started for me because William Wilberforce is one of my great heroes. He was an abolitionist in the UK. And I really admired what he did. I think there's a lot of good that came out of him and his friends around him. And then I think...
Okay, so let's just leave that there because we're just about out of time. But this is a question I have, Simon. This is a bit I'm trying to understand about the process of politics. You've had Brooke Van Velden come out with a statement saying that two mums are very important on birth certificates. So she's come out on behalf of the government. You've had Winston Peters come out on behalf of the government and say... we think a two-state solution is possible with Palestine, and Israel needs to understand that. And then you've had Brooke Van Velden say we're not going to have slavery legislation, modern slavery legislation, and yet you've got Christopher Luxon, who's a Prime Minister, saying he would march in the streets for it. So how can you have a government, which is supposed to be three parties working together, and yet so much contradictory stuff coming out of the same monster? That's my final question to you tonight.
Oh, you just dropped the big one at the end. Well, in a strange way, you sort of actually answered the question. I mean, at the end of the day, this is actually our first truly MMP government, as in it's three parties working together. And just because they work together doesn't mean they're the same. So there's going to be a lot of trade-offs. But let's be really clear when it comes to modern slavery. And this might come across as a bit harsh, but I feel deeply about this topic. If what he said a couple of years ago was true, the legislation would be on the order paper. The Prime Minister can tell pretty much any minister jump and how high. In other words, if this was wanted, it would be happening. And it then, I'm sad to say, puts into question those statements. If he really believed what he said, we'd have the legislation being drafted as we speak, Bob.
Okay, so just in his defence, he would possibly say, and I think I heard Brooke Van Velden saying this, we don't need it, we've already got it. How would you respond to that?
Rubbish.
Right.
Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. There is no reporting lines for New Zealand businesses. Some that have business interests, like Air New Zealand, to be fair, in Australia, have to accord with Australia's laws. But New Zealand does not have this legislation. We have no equivalent legislation. We need it. That's why I had a bill in the ballot. It's why the likes of World Vision, a whole lot of academics, there's hundreds of other businesses in New Zealand who are saying we want it. That defence is absolutely rubbish.
Okay, we've got to go because I can smell your dinner burning in the kitchen, and there's smoke coming out from behind you, so we better get going. Thank you, Simon. Great job again, and thank you to all the viewers. And we will be back Monday night, Straight Talk, and we'll be back next Thursday night at 5. Until then, have a great week.